Alright, so what do we got today? We got books 5 through 6. Once again, most of our emphasis is on book 6. Book 5 is a discussion of justice as it relates to the doctrine of the mean. So we're going to focus mainly on book 6. And what we're going to do today is discuss book 6 in light of the doctrine of the mean and relate the two back to one another. So first, let's recap our intellectual virtues. So in book 6, we get an exhaustive list as opposed to the non-exhaustive list of moral virtues, but we get an exhaustive list of intellectual virtues. I think yesterday I provided you with 6. That was my mistake. It's really just 5. There's art or craft. Either of these translations are appropriate for the Greek word techne. That's where we get our word technology. We have practical wisdom. Which is translating phronesis. We have, I'm going to call it, what did I call the nous? I think I just called it understanding. We have scientific knowledge. You may just call this knowledge. Episteme. And then last we have wisdom. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as philosophic wisdom. I'm just going to call it wisdom. And this translates Sophia. Okay. Now, these intellectual virtues, they correlate. The reason Aristotle has a distinction between intellectual and moral virtues is due in large part to the way that Aristotle views the soul. So, if you recall in our first discussion, Aristotle, the way he views the soul, or more particularly the psyche, is he views it as having rational and irrational components. This is the human soul. And these rational and irrational components of the human soul directly correlate to Aristotle's scala natura, or what comes to be called the scala natura. So if you recall, the lowest form of life is that of plants. What it is to be a plant, so the minimal thing that is alive, is to grow, to decay, to self-nourish, and though not necessary, commonly instantiated in living things is reproduction. What it is to be an animal, at its bare minimum, is to have the capacity for touch. And then what it is to be a human is to have the capacity for understanding, and of rational self-governance. When Aristotle conceives of the psyche, the soul, he divides it into different portions. He doesn't think that these are physical distinctions. Aristotle does not think the soul is a physical thing. He doesn't think that these are real distinctions, to use the language of Descartes. These are not real distinctions in the sense that they pick up in substances. Rather, what it is a modal, to use Descartes' language. Not that Aristotle is going to subscribe to this language at all, but it is what we may think of as like a conceptual or modal distinction. Conceptual distinction would work best. And within the soul, we have appetitive portions, nutritive portions, and intelligent portions. Let me draw a tree here. This will help out a bit more. So we have the psyche, the soul, and within the psyche, we are going to have the nutritive components, the appetitive, and then the rational, or we may say the intelligent portion. Okay? This nutritive soul directly correlates to the functions that are seen in plants. Because even though these functions are indicative of what it is to be a plant, they're also indicative of what it is to be a living thing. So everything that's higher up the scala natura has to possess those nutritive functions. Humans breathe, grow. We grow, decay, and self-nourish. So we have these components of the nutritive soul, but they're not the most interesting for us. Same thing with the appetitive. Aristotle conceives of these as those that relate to the animal components. So we have the capacity for touch, for memory, locomotion, all the things that complex animals can do. But the most important part for our purposes is the intelligent. And here we get the rational soul. Well, probably not the best way to phrase it. Let me see exactly what wording Aristotle uses to help out here. So we have this rational or intelligent soul. Either one is going to work. But then we have this distinction between a deliberative and a non-deliberative. So these are all part of this rational soul. Once again, not a real distinction. It's a conceptual distinction. And the deliberative, again the non-deliberative because this is what we've already done, the non-deliberative relates to moral virtues. So this is the portion of the soul, the portion of the mind Aristotle thinks is directly related to the moral virtues, is the non-deliberative rational part of the soul. By contrast, the deliberative portion is related to our intellectual virtues. If you recall, the way in which these two different kinds of virtues are cultivated is different. Intellectual virtues are cultivated via education, and moral virtues are developed via habituation. The only way to get braver is to do brave things. One can never get braver by reading about bravery. Okay. One cannot become more temperate by reading self-help books or reading about temperance. One has to actually do temperate things. But by contrast, developing these practical skills, or these intellectual virtues, 1 through 5 here, these are developed through education. So one doesn't become have more understanding, there's no way to really phrase that well, by habituation. One has to learn things. I want to review these intellectual virtues and amend some things I said last time, just so we're on the same page here. Okay, so our intellectual virtues. Start with craft. In many ways, craft is kind of the oddball of the intellectual virtues, because while it is an intellectual virtue, it is clearly supposed to stand as some kind of foil to the other intellectual virtues. And what craft is exactly what it sounds like. It's the ability to produce something. Okay? So smiths are your common craftspeople. People who can build, I don't know, things out of wood, things out of stone, potters, shipbuilders, whatever it may be. The ability to be productive with one's hands and produce some kind of craft in the world. Aristotle views this as an intellectual virtue. From here, I want to jump down to nous. Nous is what we were talking about with indemonstrable first principles. So we have these indemonstrable first principles. And Aristotle thinks that every single discipline, every single academic pursuit has indemonstrable first principles. There's no academic pursuit that does not have some indemonstrable first principles. And these are the kinds of things like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, the definition of circle, I don't know, I'm thinking geometrically, definition of a point, etc., etc. They can be things like axioms. So it's not always just definitions. Think about your geometry course. Axioms or postulates. The kinds of things that, in order for me to convince you of them or show you the truth of them, there is no deductive step-by-step process that I can do. Rather, all I can do to prove them to you is give you repeated instantiations in different media and hope that eventually it just clicks for you. And if it does not click for you, we really can't do anything. You can't do arithmetic and geometry, or arithmetic and algebra, or multi-step or arithmetic equations if you just don't grasp that 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's just nothing you can do. The same thing with geometry. You can't do geometry, especially your proofs. You can't do geometric proofs if you just don't understand the relevant definitions, axioms, and postulates. And the ability to grasp these is the capacity of nous. It is the part of the mind that has the aha moment. Okay? But while there are indemonstrable first principles, there are, by contrast, demonstrable principles. And these demonstrable principles are things like Pythagorean theorem, equations for force, equation for gravity, etc., etc., etc. And then I'm using these arithmetic and physics examples just because they're easier to grasp. But Aristotle thinks that this is open in every single discipline. Economics, psychology, theology, all disciplines work like this. You have some building blocks that I can't prove to you, you just kind of have to grasp. I put together my building blocks and I build things that I can prove to you. And so long as we agree on the building blocks and the rational process, the deductive process, then it's valid. It's a valid and sound argument, to use the way we talk about things now. These demonstrable first principles, because they are demonstrable, because they can be broken down into their composing and constituting steps, they are the subject here of abstaining. So demonstrable principles are the realm of episteme, or scientific knowledge, whereas our indemonstrable first principles are the realm of nous. Grasping versus building. Nous is just grasping, episteme is building. Now Aristotle thinks, like I was saying last time, that there is this, he doesn't label as an intellectual virtue, this was my mistake. There is this concept of dianoia. Dianoia is like a thinking through. Depending on context, I would translate dianoia, thinking through. And Aristotle, like Plato, he thinks that when we do deductive, as we gather episteme, as we gather the scientific knowledge, we can start with our indemonstrable first principles, the things that are passed by nous, and then reason our way up to a point, and then reason back to our first principles. So he kind of thinks of it like Plato in this triangular fashion. And this is what we do now when we do geometry. So think of how you do geometry. You have to, so let's say you're proving the Pythagorean theorem or whatever. You have to do a proof. And you do the proof starting with the axioms, postulates, definitions, and you do all the steps to get up to the Pythagorean theorem. But that's only half the story. You still have to work backward to prove it. And if you can go both ways, if you can move from first principles to the demonstrable principle and back to the demonstrated principle, the first principles, if you can do this demonstration, this dianoia, then one, we know that whatever it is that we're demonstrating is indeed true, it's valid and true, but also it shows that you've grasped everything fully. Okay? Now, we have two virtues left. There's Sophia, phronesis. Practical wisdom, theoretical wisdom. This is where challenges arise. Challenges arise in part because Aristotle is not as clear as one may hope, and because there's just a lot of different ways that this is read in the secondary scholarly literature. So we have our two remaining intellectual virtues. We have phronesis, or practical wisdom, and then we have Sophia, theoretical wisdom. And they have a really distinct scope as to what it is that they're concerned with. So, to understand this, we kind of have to understand a little bit of Aristotelian metaphysics. Aristotle thinks that there are, when we understand the world, there are particulars and there are wholes, or what he usually calls universals. Okay. So for example, take an easy one. Desk. This desk here in front of me. This desk is a particular in that it is composed of this here particular matter, but it's part of the universal that is desk. Okay? This here desk, this desk right in front of me, can never be recreated. Why? Because this desk, in Aristotle's mind, is composed of the form of the desk, the shape of the desk, but more importantly, it's also composed of the particular matter that goes into this desk. So if we're thinking in like our contemporary physics, the particular, I don't know, this is fake wood, but the particular wood atoms that go into this desk are not into the desk that's right next to it. Okay? Same thing with like, I have two black dry erase markers. They are both particulars. They are both particulars of the same universal, black dry erase marker, right? But the plastic atoms that are in this dry erase marker are not the plastic atoms that are in this dry erase marker. So the two are distinct, okay? Now, when it comes to universals, we can have different scales of analysis, so to speak, in terms of universals, because I can have a universal here that is black dry erase marker, but then there's a more broader one, which is dry erase markers. There's a broader universal that is writing utensils, etc., etc. We see this really commonly with child psychological development. So there comes a point, you're like 6, roughly 5 or 6, maybe 7, depending on the child, where every medium-sized 4-legged mammal is either a horse or a cow. Doesn't matter. It could be a donkey, it could be a mule, it could be a horse, a zebra, cow, yak, whatever. In the mind of a 5, 6-year-old child, it's all horsey or it's all cow. Okay? And if we're trying to understand in an Aristotelian sense what is going on here, what's going on is that Aristotle claims that universals are the only thing that are knowable. We can only have knowledge of a universal. There's no sense in which one can have knowledge of a particular. And when we know the universal, what we have knowledge of is the essence, or Aristotle's phrase, to tien enai. To tien enai. What it is to be. So what it is to be a thing of that kind. When we have knowledge of, for example, dry erase markers as a universal, I know the to tien enai, or the what it is to be, the essence of a dry erase marker. That is, a dry erase marker is a writing instrument designed to write on whiteboards. This is why, as an adult, I don't reach for a Sharpie to write on the whiteboard. This is why I don't reach for a ballpoint pen, right? Ballpoint pens, Sharpies, and dry erase markers are all part of the universal that would be something like writing instruments, but they differ with regard to their to tien enai. They're what it is to be, or the essence. And because I have knowledge of the essence of the thing, I can then use it for its proper role. But go back to the example of the 6-year-old kid calling every mid-sized 4-legged mammal a horsey. They have to some degree, or however we want to understand this, they have the knowledge of the universal. That is, they understand that horses are 4-legged mid-sized mammals. But what they don't have knowledge of is the stacking layers of the universals. This is why they may struggle to differentiate cows from horses, from yaks, from mules and donkeys, right? But we can even think of it in terms of ourselves as not 6-year-old children, okay? Unless you are a horse enthusiast, I can put 4 different kinds of horses in front of you, and you probably can't tell me the difference, right? You're just going to say horse, 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 horse. They're all horses, because you know what it is to be a horse, right? You know the to tien enai of a horse. But I can put in front of you a thoroughbred, a paint, a Clydesdale, and a pony, a show pony, and they're all different. Yes, they are all part of the universal horse, but they also are part of their individual universals. That is, the different kinds of horses that they are. And without appropriate knowledge of all the nuances of, I don't know, what's the study of horses? Hippiology. Word for horse in Greek is hippeus, so I guess hippiology. Without proper knowledge of hippiology, I'm just going to go with it. I have no idea if that's the right word for horse studies. I'm going to go with hippiology. Without the proper knowledge of hippiology, one can never differentiate what makes a thoroughbred different from, I don't know, a Clydesdale. Okay, but someone who does have that knowledge can do that. Now note, let's draw a picture. It's a really long neck for a horse. Here's our horse. Horses have tails, right? Yeah, they have tails. Here's our horse, okay? Here's his horse friend. Okay, here's our horses, right? Let's say they're both thoroughbreds. You can tell with that kind of stomach they're thoroughbreds. It's chunky horses. So here's our thoroughbreds, right? In Aristotle's mind, I can have knowledge of what it is to be a thoroughbred. I'm not a horse person. But I can have knowledge of what it is to be a thoroughbred. But I can't know this horse. And I can't know that horse. All I can know is what it is to be a thoroughbred. This here horse, because it is a particular, there is no sense in which one can know it. Now this becomes a problem for Aristotle, because it's fine and dandy with horses, but what then do we say about people? Right? All four of you are instantiations of the genus Homo sapien. I know what it is to be a Homo sapien. That's why I know that you are people, and I treat you like people, and I don't treat you like dogs or cats, right? But you're all different. You're all particulars. But at the same time, I know each of you. You're all different, okay? And I can differentiate between the four of you, and I know if I hear one of you down the hall, I know it's not the other one, right? Because I have some knowledge about you. This seems like it's a problem for Aristotle. That's an issue for a different course. It's just something to be aware of. This all goes back to our discussion of Sophia and Phronesis. Enough about horses. Phronesis, what phronesis is dealing with particulars. Dealing with particulars. This is why Aristotle calls the person that is daimon, the person that is happy. He calls this person the phronomos. Quite literally, the man of practical wisdom. Don't get hung up on the gender. Greek, like most languages, is a gendered language, and the default is the masculine. We could just as easily say, Aristotle won't because he's a sexist. But we can easily say phronome, a woman of practical wisdom. Doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on gender. But what phronesis is about dealing with particular situations. So let's use an example regarding bravery. If one is brave, one has knowledge of what is appropriate to fear, when to fear it, why they ought to fear it, and how they ought to behave in the face of fear. Okay? And then let's imagine this person is a general. So they know about fear on the battlefield, right? And they know how to manage fear on the battlefield, and they know how to conduct themselves on the battlefield. They know all these things, all these universals they have knowledge of. But every battle is a new battle, right? Every single battle is a particular. And they don't have knowledge of that. They can't have knowledge of that. Rather, what they do have knowledge of is universals and how behaviors tend to affect universals. Okay? So what it is to have phronesis, if you are a Hellenic general of the 3rd century BC, is to know that, I don't know, if you have cowardice in the front line of your hoplites, that your ranks are going to break and you're very quickly going to get overwhelmed. That is knowledge of the universal, but it still requires practical wisdom. If one is going to be successful in battle, one needs to know the features of that particular battle and how to behave in that particular state of affairs. That particular state of affairs that may never occur again. Okay? And Aristotle thinks that the person who has phronesis can navigate the world really well. Okay? So let's imagine a different case, one that's probably a bit more relatable. Eating. Okay? So you know that you, in general, need X amount of calories a day. Whether you know the number or you just like can eyeball it and say, I need this amount of food a day. A temperate person knows how much they need in a day, right? But the person who is temperate and has phronesis, not only do they know how much they need in a day, but they can also accommodate. So they can, let's say, I don't know, they decided to go exercise above and beyond what they normally do that morning. Because of their phronesis, because of their capacity for practical wisdom, they can say, hey, look, I know X amount of food is what I normally need on a given day, but because the states of affairs are different for today, I need X plus 1 amount of food. Okay? But this only comes with practical wisdom. So we see this very commonly. I used to do competitive powerlifting, so this is a world I was very, very interested in. But in the world of bodybuilding, what makes a top-tier bodybuilder, aside from genetics and drugs, is they know their bodies. They know on a day-to-day basis the fluctuations of their body and how much food and how much water go into their body on a daily basis. Now they know it at the level of universal. They know it in the sense of, I ought to eat this much food a day. I need this many calories in a day. But they also know how to shift gears. They know how to assess the situations of a particular day and behave temperately. So while phronesis is all about particulars, Sophia is the exact opposite. Sophia is all about universals. Sophia is quite literally the combination, the conjunction of episteme, or scientific knowledge, plus nous. It's a compound. And this theoretical wisdom, or philosophic wisdom, however you want to call it, we're just going to call it Sophia, because different translators translate it differently. This is most in other texts, Sophia literally just means wisdom. This is what you get in education. This is learning your geometry. This is learning mathematics. This is learning physics. This is learning English, Greek. It's learning history. It's learning ethics. It's learning all the things that we study. It's learning gymnastics. It's learning music. All the things that we learn, this is Sophia. This is theoretical wisdom. There is a relationship here, but also a disassociation. You know you are a good geometer when you have a fundamental understanding of the concepts of geometry. And I can put any different numbers in the equation and you can still solve it. If you are getting tripped up on the numbers, so take my Pythagorean theorem, if you can do that, but if I do this, and you can't solve the second one, if you can solve A, but you can't solve B, Aristotle's mind, you lack theoretical wisdom. You lack Sophia as it regards the Pythagorean theorem, because nothing's changed. All I changed were the variables. All I changed were the particular numbers. I haven't changed how to solve the equation in any way. But we see this with kids as they're learning math. They can do problem 1, but then problem 2 that is the same exact equation with different numbers. I can't do this. And the reason is because they lack Sophia. Okay? Now, as we're going to get through the rest of the ethics, there's going to be kind of this, and we saw this earlier back in book 1, when Aristotle asked us, what were the different kinds of lives that people commonly lead, and which one is eudaimonia found in? And ultimately, we had a tension between the political life versus the intellectual life. And the question we're asking ourselves is, which one is best? Which one most produces eudaimonia? Which one is the one that human beings ought to lead? This was a tension introduced in Book 1 of the Ethics, and we see it coming again here in Book 6. Okay? Because Aristotle is going to think, and we'll get to this as we get through 7 through 10, that phronesis is very much associated with the political life. A good public figure knows how to navigate particular situations well. Okay, they can just move around the world well. Whereas Sophia is indicative of the intellectual life. What it is to be sophos, to be wise, is to know things. Now, what we can also ask ourselves, is one of these better than the other? Or does Aristotle think there is some kind of compound life where these two are instantiated together? And how do we understand what it is to possess phronesis and Sophia? These are things we're all going to discuss as we get to our last 2 weeks of Aristotle. Next week is 7 and 8, then the week after is 9 and 10. And 9 and 10, especially 10, is really going to focus on this. Understanding the political life versus the intellectual life. The relationship between phronesis and Sophia. Okay, but before we get there, we're going to talk a little bit about human character and akrasia. And then we're going to talk about friendship, because Aristotle spends a fifth of the entire Nicomachean Ethics, so 2 whole books, talking about friendship. He thinks that friendship is one of the most critical things to living well, and so much so that without it, Aristotle is skeptical about one's ability to be eudaimon. If you have no friends in Aristotle's mind, you're not happy. Okay? And we're going to discuss that in the next week or two. But we'll pause there.